Along the coast of West Africa, great stone castles stand against the sea. They were built by Europeans centuries ago. From a distance, they look strong and impressive. Their white walls rise high above the rocky shores of what was once called the Gold Coast. Places like Elmina Castle and Cape Coast Castle seem like symbols of power and permanence. Their cannons once pointed out toward the Atlantic Ocean. They were built to defend against rival European powers. They were also built to control the rich trade routes of the region. These forts were not just military outposts, they were complex centers of commerce and administration for the European nations that built them, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and later, the British. The upper levels of these castles were often grand. There were governors' residences, chapels, and spacious courtyards. Soldiers walked along the high ramparts, looking out over the endless blue water. From these upper chambers, European officers and merchants conducted their business, enjoying the ocean breeze while making decisions that would change the course of countless lives. Looking at these structures from the outside, one might only see their European design. They appear as fortresses meant to protect those inside from attacks coming from the sea. The waves of the Atlantic crash relentlessly against their foundations, a sound that has echoed here for centuries. The salty air and the bright sun give the scene a strange kind of beauty, but this outward appearance tells only a small part of a much darker story. The strength of these stone walls was not just for defense, it was also for imprisonment. The primary purpose of these castles slowly shifted over time. Initially built for the trade of gold, ivory and spices, they became the central hubs of a far more sinister trade, the trade in human beings. The very stones of Elmina and Cape Coast were silent witnesses to a profound and terrible transformation. They became the last piece of African soil that millions of enslaved people would ever touch. Their grand architecture hid a system of unimaginable cruelty, a place where human lives were turned into cargo. The story of these castles is a story of two separate worlds, one of light and one of darkness, existing within the same walls. These coastal forts became the terrifying endpoints of a long and brutal journey. Captives were marched for weeks or even months from the interior of the continent. They were often chained together, forced along dusty trails under a harsh sun. Many did not survive the journey to the coast. Those who did arrived at the gates of places like Cape Coast Castle, exhausted, terrified, and stripped of their freedom. They were no longer seen as people with families, homes, and histories. They were now considered property, a commodity to be bought and sold. Inside the castle walls, a cruel business was conducted. African traders brought groups of captives to the European merchants. The captives were then subjected to humiliating inspections. Their bodies were checked for strength and health, like livestock at a market. Once a price was agreed upon, they were often branded with the mark of the company that now owned them. This hot iron seared their skin, a permanent symbol of their enslavement. This process was methodical and dehumanizing, designed to erase their identity and prepare them for the horrors that lay ahead. The castles served as massive holding pens. Enslaved people were held here for weeks, sometimes months, waiting for the slave ships to arrive. This period was one of profound uncertainty and fear. The captives came from many different ethnic groups and spoke different languages, making communication difficult. They were separated from their families and communities, surrounded by strangers who were also trapped in the same nightmare. The forts were transition points, places where people were systematically stripped of everything they knew before being forced into a new and terrifying world. The very structure of the castles reflected this grim purpose. The upper levels, with their airy rooms and wide views of the ocean, were reserved for the Europeans. The lower levels, however, were a different world entirely. Here, below the ground, were the dungeons. This physical separation was symbolic of the deep moral chasm that defined the slave trade. While the European traders lived in relative comfort above, the African captives were forced into darkness below, their humanity denied and their future stolen from them. The forts were machines for processing human beings. To enter the dungeons of Elmina or Cape Coast is to step into a world of absolute despair. These were not just rooms, they were underground caverns carved from stone and earth. The air immediately becomes heavy, thick with the smell of dampness, fear, and human suffering that has soaked into the walls over hundreds of years. There is almost no light. A few small slits high up near the ceiling let in only the faintest slivers of daylight. For the captives held within, the world became one of perpetual twilight and suffocating darkness. Hundreds of people were crammed into these small, airless spaces. The male dungeons were often connected to the female dungeons, but they were kept separate. Captives were chained together, their ankles and wrists bound by heavy iron shackles. There was no room to lie down, barely enough room to sit. They were forced to exist in these crowded conditions for weeks on end, sleeping, eating, and relieving themselves in the same confined space. The stone floors were cold and unforgiving, often covered in filth and disease. The only constant sound was the roar of the Atlantic Ocean. The waves crashed against the castle walls just a few feet away, a powerful, rhythmic noise that offered no comfort. For the captives, it was the sound of the terrifying unknown that awaited them. It was a reminder of the vast water they would soon be forced to cross. This sound, mixed with the groans and cries of the suffering, created a haunting symphony of sorrow. The lack of light and the constant sound of the sea created a disorienting and terrifying sensory experience. From these dungeons there was only one way out, a narrow tunnel leading directly to the sea. This passage is famously known as the Door of No Return. When a slave ship was ready, the captives were herded through this dark, low-ceiling tunnel. They emerged, blinking in the bright sunlight, onto the rocky shore where small boats waited to ferry them to the massive ships anchored offshore. This short walk was their final moment on African soil. As they passed through that door, they left behind their continent, their freedom, and their past forever. Today, the cannons on the ramparts of Elmina and Cape Coast are silent. The governor's chambers are empty, but the castles remain, preserved as powerful and solemn monuments. To walk through them is to confront a difficult and painful history. The air itself feels heavy with memory. The contrast between the sunlit courtyards above and the oppressive darkness of the dungeons below is stark and deeply moving. These places are not just historical artifacts, they are sites of conscience, places that demand reflection and remembrance from all who visit. The feeling within the dungeons is one of profound sadness and haunting. Standing on the worn stone floors, one can almost hear the echoes of the past. The clanking of chains, the hushed whispers, the cries of despair. The walls seem to hold the stories of the millions of souls who passed through them. It is impossible to stand in these spaces without feeling a deep sense of connection to the human beings who suffered there. Their fear, their resilience, and their sorrow are etched into the very fabric of the place, creating an atmosphere that is both somber and sacred. These forts are now UNESCO World Heritage Sites, recognized for their universal importance to human history. They serve as crucial centers for education, reminding the world of the scale and brutality of the transatlantic slave trade. Visitors from across Africa, Europe, the Americas, and beyond come here to learn and to pay their respects. For many people of the African diaspora, visiting these sites is a pilgrimage, a journey to connect with the origins of their ancestors and to honor their incredible journey of survival. The legacy of these slave forts is complex. They are symbols of immense cruelty, but also of the enduring strength of the human spirit. They remind us that history, no matter how painful, must not be forgotten. The waves continue to crash against their stone foundations, just as they did centuries ago. But now, they carry a different message. They carry the stories of the past into the present, urging us to remember the haunting echoes of Elmina and Cape Coast, and to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated.